For Michael's biography, after graduating with the Master of Architecture from Kent State University in 2005, Michael moved to Cleveland to work on the Flats East Bank redevelopment project. Working on this and a variety of redevelopment projects has afforded him a deep appreciation for urban environments and how people interact with them. His focus has been on complex projects that require strategic, physical, social, and cultural interventions. When not in his office or currently kitchen table at home, at architecture and strategy firm Vocon, he is immersed in initiatives that leverage Cleveland's creative efforts into visible and tangible change. Michael co-founded Kuchik Night Cleveland, which seeks to quarterly expose and attract new creative ideas by bringing together diverse presenters and audiences. Michael is currently involved in a variety of initiatives with the American Institute of Architects Cleveland chapter. He is currently living in a 1940s home in Shaker Heights that he renovated with his wife Jill and two sons, Milan and Ari. And I would like to say that I only met Michael recently because whenever I tried to sign up for Pachachka, they were always sold out and I could never get a seat. And I guess they must have moved to bigger ventures because event locations that they could have more people for. And I was very impressed when I went there and met Michael, and they have a lot bigger crowd for their programs than we do. So I was kind of jealous. So I kind of rationalized that we don't have alcohol, and that's one of the things that helps them. So I suppose if you all want to have a drink now, you should. So, all right, Michael, let me get your presentation ready, and we'll get you started.
You're the boss. In 2008, I launched a free public event with my friend Racine Parker called Pachachka Night Cleveland. And like all good ideas do, the idea for Pachachka started in a bar. For those of you that might not recognize that photo, is a picture of a bar. Haven't seen one in a few months. Racine and I met to catch up when we were talking about the amazing creative communities here in Cleveland, the chefs, photographers, programmers, designers, artists, and just how disconnected the individual communities felt from one another. They were incredibly robust and filled with passionate and talented people who are really well connected to those within their community, but entirely siloed from anyone outside their discipline or area of interest. And you really saw the disconnect when you looked at, architecture firms that were designing their own web pages while amazing graphic designers were looking for new clients. You'd go to photography exhibits and you'd see 75% of the people there were also photographers or friends of the photographers. Our creative communities were wonderful at kind of supporting themselves, but not so good at kind of mixing. And at the bar that evening, Racine and I were talking about what a creative community might look like if you were able to break down the barriers between the various creative communities and mix things up a bit. The ironic thing about our conversation was that we were talking about how disconnected communities were from one another during a time when we had more ways of connecting than we knew what to do with. Social media networks were expanding, news was coming at us from all kinds of directions. And what really complicated about that is that while information came at us in ways that we never imagined, it also was very specific. So if there's one good thing out of that, communities like the toe wrestling community could find one another. But on the flip side, that wasn't so good was that all the people we started to connect with started to look a lot like ourselves, and we started to understand just a little less about the world. The news we were getting was starting to kind of confirm our biases instead of kind of breaking them down. And a simple example of this is the way in which we receive news. So, we're delivered content that's been identified often by an algorithm as something we might already be interested in. Our past search inquiries kind of curate for us the content that is more consistent with itself than comprehensive, but it didn't always used to be that way. You compare that curation to reading a newspaper where you used to have the jump line where you'd start an article, it'd take you to another page, and when you go to the next page, you'd see articles that you wouldn't have picked out, but you might start reading. So while you're in the middle of reading that article, you're going to finish what you started, but you're probably going to look to the article adjacent to that. And you might look at the next article and might start to branch out a little bit. The jump line forced you to wander through the content of the newspaper the same way that Pachachka forces you to wander a bit through the content of our community. So you might show up to support a presenter that you've known for years, but when you're done presenting, you actually stick around to hear from people you've never met before. We started hosting these events because we wanted to help create a better way for the various communities to learn about one another and connect. So for the past 12 years, 3 times a year, we've been pulling together 8 to 10 presenters and a couple hundred audience members to share an evening of learning, connection, and as Spike mentioned, the occasional drink. On February 20th of this year, we actually held our 36th volume. That night, the presentations ranged from anything from an artist walking through her magical book about the best bathrooms in Cleveland to motorcycle design. There were 400 of us in the room, and you could feel the connections being built across the community as guests sat shoulder to shoulder, sharing stories with one another, hearing new ideas, and talking about topics they might not have otherwise been interested in that evening. And you fast forward what feels like an eternity, though it had only been 3 months since COVID-19 kind of changed the world here. It's still unsafe for people to gather in large groups, and many people have gone from having more ways of connecting with that we knew what to do with while still feeling disconnected to having kind of too few ways of connecting and rediscovering the desire to be closer. So for me, if the past 3 months have taught me anything, it's the connections are what make life worth living. Connections with your loved ones, your colleagues, your neighbors, your friends, and your community. Connections matter because they inform the context of your life. And the diversity of that context is what shapes our perspective. And the depth of that perspective shapes our actions. And it's a time like now when it's dangerously easy to disconnect, and we can't forget to rekindle our desire for connection. So I'd like to ask everyone to reflect for a second on a question I think about myself frequently. It's how well do we all know our community, and what seats have we left empty had we shown up to sit down and have the opportunity to meet someone? Because when the world comes out of this pandemic, and we will come out of this, we owe it to ourselves to never lose sight of how important it is that we find meaningful ways to be together, to learn from one another, and to meet new people and hear new ideas that might help shape our perspective on the world. Thank you very much.